over there, we will get married. Say, no, no, ya Sheikh. Say, okay, life inshallah. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ويضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Actually, today, inshallah, the last day, speak about Umar Ibn Al Khattab, radiallahu anhu, brother Yusuf. But also, after he finished, we're going to speak more about Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Before we start, he conquered Egypt. He conquered Iraq, Syria, all the area, and he never went to Egypt. He never went to Iraq, and the greatest country, and all what the empire used to be in Iraq. But he went to Palestine. There's a reason he chose to go to the Masjid Al-Aqsa. Choose the Masjid Al-Aqsa. Brother Yusuf is going to speak, and the English are going to speak about the most beautiful thing about Islamically, about the Masjid Al-Aqsa, or why Masjid Al-Aqsa Islamically, not about the history of Brother Yusuf is going to speak, inshallah.
Okay, yeah, night three, a little bit of a gap here. So we're continuing talking about one of the greatest men, arguably in the world.
Sister, you're going to have to chair, sister, inshallah. It's better for you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's better for you, sister, if you want to first.
Where we recap from where we've been. In part one, we talked about his upbringing, basically an abusive father, working the fields, his eloquence, his place in Meccan society, prestige he had, his toughness. We talked about his conversion. We talked about the qadr of Allah and how it warped basically his ultimate destiny. A destiny that would take this man from the desert fields of Mecca with camels and sheep all the way to the city of the prophets, as he rode in triumphantly on a donkey with his legs, as he humbly always was, dragging on the side. What a journey, it was. We looked in the second part about his virtues. Today, we are going to focus on his organization and his government. And I want this again to be a reflection moment for us as Muslims of what we have had in the past and what has been taken away from us. I want you to listen to the applications of law and order that this man applied. And I want you to think about what we have today, whether it be in this country or in Muslim countries around the world. I want you just to do a little bit of a comparison. And you can see what Islam is. Because one of the things that the modern day Orientalists, the atheists, they're going to attack Islamic society. They're going to say it's oppressive. It's some of the most backwards. They love that word. It's backwards, They don't have anything right. They got everything from the West. We're going to explore and see that the Constitution of the United States was present, in TED-AH. It has already been applied by Muslims long before there was ever a Constitution of the United States of America. All these things that we are told that the secular state, the governments, they rewarded us. They loved us. They gave us our rights. Only God can give us our rights. And these rights were already present much, much long ago and implemented much better. They didn't have, subhanAllah. They didn't have issues where you had a governor could say, okay, because I'm faking a crisis, I can suspend your rights. That never happened in the Islamic State. We're going to explore some of the relationships between Umar Ibn Al Khattab and his governors, the standard of strictness that he applied to them. And then we are going to end with a bit of happiness/sorrow, as we are going to talk about the short, untimely end to his life, how that unfolded. We're going to go through that sad moment in Islamic history. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite hadiths about the door. We're going to know Umar being the door and why it was that. And I had this vision of him before I even knew this hadith. So it was something that really resonated with me. As we get there, we are going to look at that. So first and foremost, organization. We talked about Abu Bakr and what his was building and solidifying what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had built. Umar came in where there was a foundation laid, but you can say it was like the skeleton or the outlines. It was his job to fill it in. By the time he was done, we had a postal service. We had governors. We had standards. We had judicial law and order. We had a huge zakat tax collecting system that benefited everyone equally. We had, I mean, again, from humble beginnings to having a fully functional state. I don't know what that is.
I have to answer you. Go ahead.
Okay. So when Omar had a criteria, and all this has been compiled from many hadith researchers and scholars over the years of his selection for being a governor. Nowadays in the United States, if you look at who's going to qualify for a governor, usually it's who gets the most campaign donations, who's able to be on television the most, who's got the most money, who's been a lawyer, in the past. Never do you find who this person was before. What do they represent? How did they live their life? How religious? These questions are never asked, anymore when we select a leader. Umar, first and foremost, went for capability and trustworthiness. He evaluated the people. He evaluated their skills, what they were known as in their community before. Was this person trustworthy? Was this person someone who was known to lie? Obviously, if this person was someone with a bit of a shady character, they were disqualified. He had a very interesting concept, which something that also doesn't apply nowadays as well. He would select you on your mentality based on if you were a Bedouin who lived a more nomadic life, he would not put a towns dweller as your governor for a Bedouin society. And he would not put the vice versa, to that. He wanted to make sure that the mentality of the governor reflected the people who were in the community. There are several examples of his appointments reflecting that. He would try to appoint from the people who had a connection to the community and to the town. Again, you compare that to nowadays, you will have people running for the United States Senate or the United States House of Representatives. They've probably never even been to the city or the area, the district that they're even running for. You have people from California, all of a sudden, they're running for Senate in New York. We had Hillary Clinton do this many, many years ago when she ran for the Senate in New York. She didn't even have a residency, there. She had no connection to the New York people, whatsoever. Umar Ibn Al Khattab made sure that when a governor was appointed, there was that connection. The governor was to be one of the people. And in typical Umar fashion, and we'll see this a little bit later when we get to Uthman in the next session that we are going to do. Uthman had a different mentality on this, appointing relatives to positions of power. Umar was dead against this. Umar did not care how qualified any of his family members were. They were not going to get appointed under his watch because he didn't want to create any minor trace of fit. Because people say, oh, you're the caliph's cousin. Oh, you're the caliph's brother-in-law. That's why you got that position. Even if this man was the most qualified, still there would always be that shadow of a doubt that would linger there. Now, Uthman went with a different approach, so we can't say he's wrong because Uthman was fair also with his family members, and he removed several of them for violations. But Umar took the approach, I typically, my own personal opinion, align more with that. I wouldn't want to have family members. It's just very hard to separate, that family tie and kinship from whether you can get the job done, or not. There's one famous story of a gentleman from the Banu Aslam clan. Umar would scout. We're going to talk about this later. He would scout, and oftentimes he would have his leaders live around him for a period of a year where he could evaluate their character before he decided if he was going to elevate them to office. Well, this gentleman from Banu Aslam was possibly going to be put into a governor position. This is after the Syrian conquest. And Umar had kissed his child. And the guy said, I love you. And the guy said, I never do that to children. What do you want? And Umar said, out. Right there, you were showing me that you have a lack of compassion. You are not fit for this position. Small things like that he saw as a weakness in this gentleman's character that would reflect. If you're like that with your own children, how good are you going to be with caring and having compassion for your own people? And as we see with the droughts and all the things that were going on during Umar he had a three-front war. He was fighting in Egypt. He had battles going on, as the Sheikh pointed out in the beginning, in Syria. He had it in Iraq all at the same time. We are going to talk again about the stresses and all the different consignments and things that had to be done to manage that. He was under tremendous, stress. Lots of things, going on. And during the droughts, he made sure that the widows of soldiers who died in the jihad, who had no husbands to feed them, he would drive and personally carry food and items to them to make sure that these widows got taken care of. He wanted to personally make sure that it was done. He didn't have to do this. He was the caliph. He had all these responsibilities, all these things weighing on his mind, plus his obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he wanted to just make sure 100% that it was done right. And he did not issue this to anyone else. He would do it, of course, the people were doing it as well, but he wanted to take an active role, in doing that. So again, right?
This is my sugar is very high.
Oh wow!
I was at a wedding, a Moroccan wedding, so
so they definitely fed you there.
oh yeah.
I've been to many Arabic cultured weddings. Oh my goodness, feel like at the end, like you got a bowling ball in your stomach. And food is great and
First time I
fantastic.
eat bread for a long time. Now 203. I think I'm sitting already.
Yeah, I was wondering because that sounds like the weather storm, like there's a tornado warning or something.
Connected to my stomach and the phone, and then my wife, she find out. This is the problem. This is the scary part, huh? Okay,
One of my favorite things that Umar had done was he monitored the wealth of the governors going in and during their tenure. We just had a story the other day of the United States Congresswoman whose salary has been $200,000 for the last 20 years that she's been in there. And she has a net worth of $100 million. Now, I tell you, I thought I was good at saving money, but that's quite phenomenal, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Where you actually save more money than you supposedly earn. Now, was that honest? Or were you using the office to enrich yourself? Umar kept an eye on these. He had this mind for corruption. He knew human society. And as I said, we're going to talk about the door, later. Why he was that strong door that held it all together. And when he left, as we're going to see, everything slowly started to fall apart. But this is a very, very key provision. You are taking the office for your duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to enrich yourself. He constantly chastised and got on his governors. If you were wearing flashy clothes or you had too much furniture, he would infamously hit you with a stick. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories that we get to later of what he did, which I wish we could do to every single congressman in Washington. It would really be a humbling experience as we talk about what he did to one of them in Syria, as we get to that as we go on later on. But he made sure, basically, the time of your appointment, we knew your wealth. We know what your stipends are, your salary. And we are going to make sure that you're still getting, you have to your net worth, what you're actually being paid. There were several cases of people being seen again with items that there's just absolutely no way they would have been able to afford, and Umar disciplining them and removing them, in some cases. Again, very focused on corruption. He wanted them to be simple, humble people, who could be related to by the common person, in the city. One of his favorite, one of my famous lines, was he said famously, "This Ummah will be doomed by knowledgeable hypocrites." And that's a very key statement because we see a lot of that, going on today. One of the most dangerous things is a knowledgeable hypocrite. It's a manipulator. It's a con man, charlatan. They go by a variety of different names. And Umar was very, very keen that I want to see your inward and your outward behavior as much as I possibly can before I'm going to allow you to be into these type of positions. You can come up and speak all day long with eloquent words, at the end of the day, and mesmerize the people. We see all these cult of personalities on the internet these days, but then you look at the body of work and you see who's really behind that. And again, you have to have a certain bit of oversight. Another key thing he did was he never would allow in any of the territories a Christian, Magian, fire-worshipping Zoroastrian, or a Jew to have any position of authority over the Muslims. This was very key. And we're going to get to that later in the relationship between kuffar being in Muslim lands. One of the things I always hear from non-Muslims is, "Oh, you guys are so bigoted. You won't even allow a Christian in Mecca." And when we get to the end of this presentation, we are going to go over some of the deep wisdom behind that and why that is. But to have a non-Muslim authority figure over the Muslims is about as haram as it gets. You could say that. Now, we, of course, as Muslims now, we live in non-Muslim countries. Some of us were born here. Some of us have come here under our own free will, and that's a different circumstance. But as you're starting to see the words being whispered here and there, that this is starting to develop in Muslim countries, as well. They're starting to push certain figures as positions of power in the Muslim world, in traditional Muslim-held positions. Again, one of the main things governors will also do, organizing Hajj. Umar had used Hajj for several brilliant reasons. I mean, several different methods for Hajj besides the obvious Hajj. You're good.
I don't know. Hold on a second.
Sorry about that. Oh, no worries.
Let's stop it from here. Okay. خلاص.
Besides just going and organizing the Hajj for the people, Hajj was also an opportunity because all the different Muslims from across the Umrah were brought in basically to Mecca, and there was a forum there where they could air complaints and issue grievances and concerns to the Caliph himself, about their governors. Can you imagine a system, like that today? If we had that type of unity where the Hajj became, of course, we do our religious rites. After we complete, we have a forum where we all can sit down, discuss the needs of our community, discuss any criticisms we have. Again, something that has been taken from us. That was essential, in early Islam. You find this would be a great opportunity for criticism. He accepted not only for his governors, but for himself, as well. So you found people bringing, it's like a big suggestion box that was going on. Had punishments was another thing that Umar had tight oversight on, making sure those punishments for Sharia violations were handed out fairly. We went through such a story in a couple lectures ago where we talked about the famous example of his own son had been caught guilty drinking alcohol. And the governor, Umar Ibn Al went lightly on him and said he was going to administer the punishment in his own house. And Umar took extreme exception to that. How dare you treat him any differently than you would give him the punishment in public as it was prescribed? So again, that was another essential function of the governors during that time, holding everything together. And our Sharia punishments are one of the things that keeps the society going. When you lose that, look at the crime now. I mean, there was you could go on YouTube or Twitter almost every single day and see out in California, you've got 20, 30 young people running into these stores and grabbing all these luxury items and stealing, assaulting the clerks and the cashiers. Because California just passed a law where you have to steal over $950 to be charged. And even then, you're going to get charged with nothing. You'll be let out in an hour, and you may have to pay $100 or something in fine if you're stealing $950 worth of goods. And if you get caught, you got to give $100 back. I think that's a win. If you have that type of mentality. So again, you see when these punishments fade, the bad people so those punishments are there to protect the good people, of society, to keep the society in line. They have to be issued fairly, and they have to be issued when they're called for. He made sure, of course, that all the stipends, which is the allocation from the Beit al-Mal, the treasury, were issued basically. This was another governor responsibility, under Umar. Now, we talked about, for those of you who were not here, in the last lecture, Abu Bakr's system was a bit different, than Umar's. And in Umar's last years, he acknowledged that, as always, he's like, Abu Bakr's always better than me. It was just kind of his humbleness. But Abu Bakr's system for this was everybody was equal. He didn't care if you were Muslim for 2 hours versus if you were Muslim for 13 years. Abu Bakr believed everybody should get an even, amount of the money. Well, Umar's system rewarded people for achievements and duration. Like if you were at Badr, as an example, or Uhud, or you were there in your original migration from Mecca to Medina, you would obviously be rewarded more than someone who came in, after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his system was a little bit, different. And Umar later would say that I like the Abu Bakr system, better now that I thought about it. But he issued it, and again, nothing necessarily wrong, with that. But that's just how it was done, during his Khalifa. The mail service that he instituted. We talk about mail today, and a lot of people think it's an invention of the West. Umar had an advanced mail service at the time. People would send anonymous letters to him in Medina complaining about governors. And this was a way, or complaining about how things were being run. This is, again, so far advanced to what we hear nowadays with modern day democracy. This is representative government. And Umar would address those complaints. And he would always go and check things out. He would send people to go and conduct searches and find out exactly the source of some of these complaints, if they're genuine or not. In the case of Sa'd ibn Waqqas, we'll see the name Kufa. That's going to pop up a lot as we get to Uthman, and all the fitna that originated out of there kind of started during this period of time as you were bringing in more people who were not born Muslim. They were not culturally Muslim. They never even met the Prophet. These were people that came in. They had their own desires. They had their own cultures. And you're now, says the Sheikh brought up, all the way from Libya, all the way to Iraq to Syria. Lots of new people coming in. Lots of we say in English, a whole can of worms, if you will, was being opened, on the Ummah. And I mentioned earlier the famous striking of the stick. This is one of my favorite stories with Umar. When he had went to Syria after conquest, there was a gentleman by the name of Iyad ibn Ghanam. Do I pronounce that correctly? Iyad ibn Ghanam.
Oh, yeah.
Iyad. And when Umar went to meet this gentleman, this governor, he found him living with luxury. He had a bath in his home. And at that time, I mean, you're talking again, that's just something that only the creme de la creme, the elite of the elite would have. And you're a governor. And we talked again about his commitment to humbleness amongst the governors. So what Umar did, this is typical Umar fashion, he got him a shepherd's clothing that someone who herded sheep, he made him wear it, and he made him go out for a month and tend to the sheep. And he made him get the water for them. He made him smell like the animals. He made him wear that clothing in front of the people. And I mean, I was reading this. I didn't know this hadith when I was preparing for this lecture a few weeks ago. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I wish we could, again, do that to some of our politicians today. I wish we could take them and put them in a meat processing facility and have them drilling on the side of the road and digging ditches and things. And, maybe it would bring a little bit of humility or humbleness, to some of our leaders. But after that point, he said, now go back out there and do it right. Get rid of this stuff. And I mean, what an amazing, eye-opening experience there. This must have been for this man, because again, at the end of the day, you can have all this wealth and all this money, but once you start getting sick and die, how's that bath going to help you?
Sorry. Actually, he was rich already. He was actually very rich. So he took it just from that, not by the map or his salary. No, because he was rich. That's why using what he already had. But still, as for everybody, you have to be equal. Yeah.
So, no doubt. Yeah, he wasn't a thief. He wasn't stealing money from the Beit al-Mal, which had happened in Islamic history later, unfortunately, and even during the period of Umar. Another story of Sa'd ibn Waqqas had built a gate in front of his house. The reason he built the gate was not because of extravagance or show. Sa'd was a very humble man. We'll talk about him a little bit later as we talk about him being the commander of the army in Iraq. But he was disturbed because his house was in close proximity to the market. And all the chatter and the noise was disturbing him when he was home. But the image that it produced, the optics, if you will, was that, I'm better than you. There's a barrier between me and you. And Umar ordered him to tear it down. Get rid of this. This is, again, not the type of image that a man of the people should have. You go now and you look at the governor's mansions in any state. I mean, you've got a gate that's so long, you could probably, drink a whole bottle of water. You used to be driving past the gate. I mean, these gates are that big and massive, and he's buried deep in there. He's completely disconnected, from the people. But if you're an honest, righteous leader, why would you have to hide? And that again brings us to this question, and we're going to pause here on this moment, because you'll now see in the Ummah, when you watch, you see these scholars and these sheikhs, wannabe sheikhs online, all these people that they say you're not allowed to criticize your leaders in any capacity. They are misinterpreting, obvious statements of the Prophet ﷺ. The leader has certain, and we talked about this when I did the lecture a couple months ago. We talked about what the duty of a husband to his wife, a wife to the husband. We also talked in that about the imam or the leader over the people and the people to him. That leader is trusted by us to govern righteously. But in turn for we trust him, he trusts us to follow him and obey him. And it's a two-way street there. But if this leader on one hand is encouraging sin, is encouraging things that go against the deen, you have a right to criticize him. But if you go on and you listen to some of the Dawah Mafia people going around on YouTube now, you will find that, no, you should never do that. You should encourage them. They made a mistake. I think when you bring pornographic singers into your country to sing, I don't think that's a mistake. A mistake is getting a ruling wrong. You know, Umar made some mistakes. We talked about those in the past. But when you go and you bring an open pornographer who is singing messages that blaspheme Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and blaspheme the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you bring them openly to perform in your country, that is worthy of criticism. Not saying we should all grab guns and do an armed revolt, but we're talking about an honest discourse, you know, of why. And of course, Umar set that standard. This has always been part of our history. We have a right to challenge our leaders if they're going against the Quran and the Sunnah. There is nothing haram about that. If you wanted to add something on that, continue. Mm-hmm. So this section here, I really had to take it to the shredder because it is quite long. I intend on doing some stuff for the brothers later on down the line as we're trying to do some stuff online on YouTube, covering some of the military battles that went on during this period of time because they're quite extensive. Lots of great military tactics and lots of stories that really show how the Muslims were viewed, particularly by the Persians. The Persians were in awe of these Arabs, these Bedouin savages, as they looked at them. How all of a sudden did these people who were starving, who were fighting, who were raiders and caravan robbers, we are one of the most powerful armies in the world. How were they able to go toe-to-toe with us on the battlefield? How did this happen? There was a shock. These Persians were well-trained soldiers that the Muslims now were engaged in combat. They were armored. They had elephants. They had unlimited supplies. You know, unlike the Muslims who had typically gotten their wares from other tribes they had conquered or some small blacksmithing operations here and there, but most of the Muslim early battles were against other Arabian tribes. They were against farmers and agricultural and trades, much like themselves. But now the Muslims were engaged in combat in two fronts with the two biggest armies in the world at that time, the Persians and the Byzantine Empire. And the Persians were in awe when they first encountered the Muslims. They would see the prayers and they would see all these things. What are they doing? Who are these people? What is all of this? You know, it was really quite a moment of, you know, they would hear the adhan in the morning and they thought it was a call to war, you know, initially, as they could see it across the fields as the Muslims would gather up in the morning to pray, you know, before battle. And needless to say, again, I will go in very extensively into this in future lectures of all the different battles that happened. But initially, the Muslims were losing. You know, there was a lot of death, a lot of martyrs. And Umar famously said, you know, we may not know their names, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows their names. Of a lot of the men that gave their lives on those battlefields. And at the end of the day, it was another moment, much like Abu Bakr had. It was Umar's moment in the sun, his opportunity to seize the moment. The Muslims were retreating. They were backing up to the original borders and basically conceding land as the Persians seemed to be poised to crush them. And what happened was Umar put in a draft system. You know, he consigned people to military service. Those same apostates we talked about a few weeks ago in the life of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who Abu Bakr banned them from leadership positions. He banned them from military service. Umar opened them back up. These people now had years, almost a decade, to change. A lot of them did. They still were not allowed to hold leadership positions, but these people now were ready to fight in jihad for the Muslim army. They raised an army of 11,000 men across Najd, bringing these tribes together. Sa'd ibn Waqqas was given the leadership position, you know, of this army, and things immediately began to turn around. And in 15 AH, one of the most famous events basically you'd have in the world, the gates of Persia would become officially open for the Muslims. As the Muslims now, this small city known as Mecca that no one really had heard about, you know, outside of the Arab world, would now be all the way, you know, to Persian, as we're going to get to now, all the way to the gates of Jerusalem, you know, as well. A lot of battles, though, went on. So there's a deep subject there to go through a lot of the unique military tactics that the Muslims employed. One example was going up against the elephant riders, as an example. The elephants were crushing the Muslims initially. So what they had done was they had disguised their camels. They had put different decorations on the camels to scare the elephants. You know, lots of creative tactics and interesting strategies of war that were employed by the Muslims during this time, which shows, again, you carry yourself morally, righteously, you follow the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, use your brain, your creativity, your imagination, you will go a long way. You know, you will constantly be, I mean, again, outnumbered, battle after battle, but yet victory after victory. But then in 15 AH, same year, ironically, now there's a little bit of debate whether it's 15 AH or 16. Simultaneously, there were battles waging 1,000 miles away in what we now presently call Syria, Jerusalem, present day Palestine, you know, if you will, and the gates of Jerusalem would be opened to the Muslims. And this is, again, one of the biggest moments in Islamic history as Umar rode in on the donkey, as I mentioned, to and how did he behave when he got there? Did he come in, you know, with his chest out and let's oppress the Christians and show them who's boss now? Or did he treat them, as always, with dignity, you know, and respect? Umar was out, where do you want to pray? You know, for his first salah, you know, in the new city. And Umar said, I don't want to pray. They offered him to pray in one of the Christian churches, Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as they call it. And he refused because he said he did not want the Muslims to go start praying there if they saw him pray there, because he didn't want to disrespect the Christians.
That actually was, that's called Beit Lahem. Beit Lahem was Isa alayhi salam born in that area. And that actually people, Christians, they come all over the world. They make like pilgrimage to that place. And very famous place, but he refused, but he pray outside. Now, from the church, Masjid Umar. They make Masjid, the people are going to go to Masjid Umar over there. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And we saw immediately that the Christian symbols were not destroyed. Another example you would see is the way the Jews, you know, were treated basically in the area. Christians used to spread garbage, you know, around the famous rock, you know, the rock where Jacob spoke to God in Jewish tradition. And the Christians, in order to smear them, wanted to make their Qibla dirty. They would throw garbage, you know, around it. And Umar personally picked up this garbage, you know, with his own hands, along with a team of other people to dignify, you know, the area. Like, we're all on the same team. Inshallah, one day you'll come around and you'll join us, you know, but right now there's no compulsion of religion, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and we are not to force, you know, anyone, and the rights were respected. So much so, and later on I'll do, this is inshallah an ambitious project of mine, I want to cover the Crusades a little bit later on in another lecture down the line. I want to show how the Jews actually fought with the Muslims against these crusading armies, which shows again the amount of respect, you know, that the Muslims showed the townspeople. We talked earlier, you know, I was talking about the Constitution. One of the things that Umar was very adamant about was that when you take over a people, you don't go and enter their homes. You do not enter their homes. If they're non-military combatants, you do not enter their homes. You do not force the people to house Islamic soldiers. This is the Constitution of the United States in the 1700s. Finally, they came around to giving those same exact rights, that you are not forced to quarter soldiers. You're not allowed to have illegal search and seizures. Islam was doing this, you know, back in 1314 AH. You know, back in the 640s, we had such systems to protect the dignity of the people. You imagine, you know, you're a non-combatant or there's women and children in the home, and you blow open the door and there's women who are not presentable, obviously, and their children being invaded like that. Islam never allowed this. And the dignity that was being, how we were treating those people, also made them convert. The Orientalists will always say Quran in one hand, sword in the other. But you see, when you actually get really into it, most of these people came willingly because they knew how they were treated under the Persians and behind the Byzantiums on the other side. You would grow food for them, they take it all. And that's the king's property. That's the emperor's property. You know, the Muslims would take zakah from you on those goods and distribute it to the poor, you know, among the society, but you still got to keep the majority of your hard-earned labor. But other empires, no. You were a subjugated slave. You know, so that type of treatment really helped, you know, in bringing these people in. And we see that classic example of that in Jerusalem, in the way that the Muslims rule. Now, I'm not going to talk about later on where other groups who were Muslim in name only came in, didn't give the same rights or respect. We're talking about the Sahaba. We're talking about the companions in the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're not talking about some Turkish groups way later who did not give such same respects and dignities, and that's used against us. But that's not how the religion was meant to be. That's not what was ordained. So those Orientalist claims, again, are, dumbfounded and, short-lived. Now, one of my favorite, as I was talking about earlier, was the hadith of the door. And we've talked about today, yes, last time as well, of all the things that Umar had done that really held it together. All the wealth that was coming in from these conquests, all these new cultures and people, all the systems for controlling the governors. There was a famous hadith from Hudayah ibn Yaman that talked about a door, a representative door that would be closed, and then it would be broken. And that door would only be filled again before the day of judgment. And when asked about this, he said, what is the door? He said, the door is Umar. Umar was that door that basically was closed, that kept all the evil out. And when he's asked to report about this, he heard this directly. He said, I will not lie. I would never narrate something falsely from the Prophet ﷺ. And the hadith of the door, that Umar was the door. He was the rock. He held it all together. Without his strictness and toughness, none of this would have gotten as far as it did. And as we go, as I mentioned before, no disrespect to Uthman ibn Affan or Ali ibn Abi Talib. They were righteous men, and we call them the four rightly guided caliphs. But during their tenure, you start to see fitna grow and grow, and the cracks start to appear. And that door has been wide open ever since the days of Umar ibn Khattab. And that's why when I studied Islam independently, when I was first converting, I always looked at the glory days, as I call it, the first three. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr, and Umar. That was our golden age. Because after that, it was trying to hold it together and then ultimately losing it. And to us today, being a shell of our former selves. But he was that door, and that door is destined to stay open, until the end times, when finally it'll be brought back in and closed. So now we get to the end, if you will. 23, Hajj. Umar makes a dua.
This is still about Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem.
Or if you want to add something, yeah.
It's very important here. Very important to understand. I just mentioned after Salah, question first. Now, detail. Now, Umar radiallahu anhu, he opened Egypt. And Egypt is the greatest country in that time. And Persia, Iraq, Persia and Iran, and Syria. And also all the Middle East and part of Africa, he opened, but he never entered those areas. But when he entered Jerusalem, Palestine, he drove with a donkey. And his servant to the donkey all the way to Palestine, not to any other country. How valued that. Why? Number one, he said, because I wish Rasulullah was us. Because Rasulullah he wished to go and conquer and pray inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. Rasulullah went once, Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. Al-Buraq came to Palestine, and also he almost, when he was a kid, 12 years old, with his uncle, always in the border of Palestine. And Abraham, the bank, he said, no, go back, the Jews will kill you. And then Umar Ibn Khattab, he chose, and even Bilal, when he conquered, he stayed there, never went back to Medina. Why? Because Rasulullah loved Palestine, Masjid al-Aqsa. He loved it. Okay, and he chose there. And Umar Ibn Khattab here, even the priest, the big priest over there, in their Bible, they saw the one he conquered and opened Jerusalem have 17 patches in his clothes. 17, they're waiting for someone to come. And when he came, looked like a homeless. And they found 17 patches exactly. But what? And the Byzantine, the war killing millions, thousands of Muslims they killed. thousand Christians, they killed each other. But Umar Ibn Al Khattab, he make a treatment called Al-Wafiqa Al-Umariyah. Until now, go to a museum in England, museum in Italy, you'll find this. The treatment, how the Muslim, and what he said, Min Abdullah Umar Ibn Khattab, not the president, the Amir, the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Amir al-Mu'minin. That's his name. He's humble himself. And the treatment, longer treatment, until now, go any museum, you'll find this treatment in Arabic first. He wrote it down himself. And but who? And not four of the Sahaba, Khalid ibn Walid, signed it. That means all the Muslims, if you are about the Christian and the right of the Christian and the right of the Jews, Jews, not Zionism, Jews. Okay, number one. Number two, Umar ibn Khattab, number one, he came from Medina all the way to Palestine. He went to Gaza. The masjid I told you once about the Masjid al-Imari, when he used to have a business there before Islam, he prayed there in Gaza. And he went all the way to Palestine, from Arabia to Palestine. Actually, from my city to Jerusalem with the camel takes, not the camel, I mean a donkey. Takes, yeah, Allahu Alam. But my point, even a ticket in the car takes 45 minutes, 1 hour to reach Masjid al-Aqsa. Every Friday when I was in high school, every Friday I prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa. Every Friday. Me and my sisters. I have sisters in that time. So my point here, Umar Ibn Khattab, choose was Rasulullah, Masra Rasulullah. The first qibla for the Muslims, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is number one. Number two. Number two, unfortunately, there is not one single Muslim country until now, not one single Muslim country supporting Palestine or Masjid al-Aqsa. Not in one president or king or anybody. No one, period. And the only people defending Masjid al-Aqsa, who? The Palestinians. Only the Palestinians, especially Masjid al-Aqsa. It's the people live in Masjid al-Aqsa. They did every single day they die. But if one of the Zionists die, Emirates, Arabia, those kings don't speak about. They're conveyed, they're sad because one person died, not every day in Palestine dying. Every day, by the way, literally every single day. But Libya now and Iraq and Morocco right now, they're dying out with Iraq. But in Palestine, for years, by the way. Number one. Number also, Umar Ibn Khattab, when he entered Masjid al-Aqsa, also, he makes constitution for life through Islam. And number one, as brother Muhammad, he cleaned Masjid al-Aqsa himself. He cleaned himself and would be garbage. The Roman used to be Roman, only garbage and animals there. He cleaned it completely and start as a Masjid al-Aqsa. And not the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock actually, after like 350 years after Umar Ibn Khattab, they built it. That the blue, the dark of the Masjid al-Aqsa. But my point, the Masjid al-Aqsa itself, that the first masjid on earth, and who started, astaghfirullah, second masjid, first masjid Mecca, and Masjid al-Aqsa with Adam alayhi salam. In between 40, the hadith doesn't say 40 days or 40 years, but he built the Mecca first, and he went straight to Palestine, to Masjid al-Aqsa. That's why we have, regardless I'm Palestinian, you are American, you are Morocco, here, we always think this is my country, this is my masjid as well. My masjid as well, we have to defend that. You know, one day, even when I was sick, the FBI came to arrested me. Because what? Because I always defend the Masjid al-Aqsa. I don't want to say that the Masjid al-Aqsa belong to the Jews. In the interview, I said, no, it belongs to the Muslims. I didn't say Palestinian, because it's not belong to the Palestinians. It belongs to Muslims. It belongs to us. And the Al-Wafiqa Al-Umariyya, Umar Ibn Khattab, he wrote that treatment is everything in details. Maybe one day, inshallah, Yusuf can get that. We read it together.
Yeah, the Pact of Umar.
Yeah, it's very, very important to understand it and to share it, to understand and to share, to speak about it more and more. But my point, Palestine or Masjid al-Aqsa especially, belong all Muslims to think about it. Umar Ibn Al Khattab also, because that's garbage in that time, he prayed also in Beit Lahim, when Jesus alayhi salam born in that area, he also Masjid Umar. And also, with Masjid al-Aqsa here, then another front of Masjid al-Aqsa straight, another masjid with Masjid Umar also. Why they build that masjid? Because the cleaning the masjid takes a while to clean the masjid and to build, actually to rebuild the masjid. They make Masjid Umar until now. Inshallah, soon all of us will visit and pray Masjid al-Aqsa. Inshallah, we'll complete the reparation. Inshallah, I will be the imam there. Inshallah. Inshallah, continue. Sorry about that.
Oh, it got me to a point. I mean, you imagine, like going to Umar during his time and saying that you would need a visa to go to a Muslim nation with borders drawn by non-Muslims. I mean, that's what we're facing now.
Yes.
As he said here, that these belong to all of us. That event that took place in the cave, led us all the way to the seal of the prophets. And when Umar came there, that was the stamping. That was the culmination, of that one moment in history, bringing the religion back, fortifying it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, I've completed your religion for you. And on that day, when he wrote in there, that was the completion of the process. It had gone our moment in time in history. And we are now being, of course, punished, you could say, for our own sins over the last few centuries. We'll get into that as we build into lectures, into the future. But it's unfortunate what's going on. I was learning it's almost every Ramadan they go and they attack the Muslims there who are praying. I mean, it's terrible. And as he said, you don't see any of those guys. I even mentioned their names. They're not worthy of it. Just condemn one of these attacks. Nothing. Nothing. You hear none of it. It's just unbelievable. It's terrible. Something else that was unfortunate, black eye in our history. In the 23rd year, Umar went to Hajj, and he made a specific dua. He said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want to die a martyr. And the reason for that was because we know martyrs, they go straight to Jannah. There's no day of judgment for them. The sacrifice and the conviction that you had in your heart was so pure that you've earned, that distinction. Umar admired and feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so much and knew all of his shortcomings, like all of us know about ourselves. We know what goes on in here sometimes isn't too pretty. And Umar feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he knew his deeds and his shortcomings. And he prayed for that. He made this dua to die basically a martyr's death. So we find that then we had certain couple of events that kind of set the stage for the end. You had a gentleman by the name of Al-Mughira. I pronounced that. Al-Mughira. Yeah. He had a slave by the name, I know I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. I've never gotten this right in 10 years. Abu Lu'lu'a. Yeah. Yes. Very hard in the English speakers like ourselves to ever pronounce those, all these L combinations.
So this man, Abu Lu'lu'a al-Majusi, this man until now, the Shia in Iran and Iraq, until now, they're making celebration because he killed Abu.
We're coming to that, unfortunately.
Okay.
That's at the end there. So there was an involvement. This gentleman was a former Persian fire worshipper, Zoroastrian, if you will, who was a slave after a conquest. And there was debate at the time, and I mentioned this earlier that we would get to this, about kuffar being in Muslim lands. Because no matter what, people have to understand this. When it comes to being friends or companions of non-believers, secretly, most of them are going to hate you. They are going to despise you. Because if they are moral and righteous, they will see the beauties of Islam and want to become Muslim themselves. If they're hell-bent on following their desires, obviously they are going to clash, with Islam. Usually when I would talk Islam to people, the first thing I would hear, you can't have sexual relations outside of marriage. What kind of religion is this? No fun. You can't eat pork. No fun. You can't drink on Friday night. No fun. We had a social media influencer, I'm not going to mention his name, recently said, I can't sell real estate because it's haram. What is this religion? So real estate, which exploits the home buyer, exploits families, is something good if you can profit off of the misery, of others. But these are the type of people who are going to reject, Islam. And if you allow non-Muslims into Mecca, into Medina, we know what would have bound to happen. It's starting to happen now because you're seeing them coming in. Recently, they had a Jewish man in the Prophet's masjid in Medina. It's just a matter of time before more incidents like we're about to describe start to transpire. There was a reason, for separating these people from those core Muslim cities, because we wanted safety, tranquility, peace. We wanted to be surrounded by like-minded people, people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the best judges of character. So this gentleman came to Umar as he was walking. Umar was always accessible to the people. And he said, "Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, my slave owner, my handler, is not paying me my fair share of wages." And Umar Ibn Al Khattab said, be patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be with you. But he didn't handle the matter right then and there. As we talked about earlier, how much was on this man's mind. The man interpreted this as, you are not respecting me because I'm non-Muslim, because I'm not Arab. You are horrible. And the hatred boiled, inside of him. Little do people talk about in the story was Umar actually went to his slave master the same day and was getting the situation resolved. But he did not resolve it right then and there. This gentleman went, he forged a dagger, double-bladed, double-sided, got it coated with poison. And in the Fajr prayer on Wednesday, the 26th of Dhul Hijjah, he came in, as Umar, as he often did, he would tell people, straighten your lines. He went and he turned, and then the knife was plunged several times into his back. As the gentleman attempted to flee, he killed up to 13 Muslims who were praying, who were unprepared for this. Now, there's a couple different stories of whether he committed suicide or he was subdued and killed by the Muslims who caught him. You will hear Shia accounts, as Brother Ibrahim was saying, where they claim Ali ibn Abi Talib saved this gentleman and took him to Iran, and he lived the rest of his life and happily ever after, you can say. And they built a little temple to him, and it's still there to this day. Only they stopped the people used to gather there and have a big festival, a party, commemorating this man, until Al-Azhar of Egypt had stepped in and basically told them, you need to stop this, or we're going to cut some funding. Some things are going to happen here. And they kind of cut the festivals out. But they used to have festivals in honor of this man. And then they have these stories with no narrators at all, in most cases, that Ali ibn Abi Talib helped this guy flee and then took him there and all these things. But official accounts in our sources was that he committed suicide. That's the most reliable. There are some that he was killed, but after taking 14 lives. Now, when Umar was brought back, they had given him milk, and they started noticing that it was coming out through the wounds. And Umar being Umar, what he always did, the first thing he thought of was he wanted to get Aisha's permission to be buried next to, as he called them, my friends, my companion. He wanted to be buried with Abu Bakr and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, when you address her on my behalf, do not say Amir al-Mu'mineen. I am no longer fit to be the commander of the Muslims in the condition I'm in. So he even, to his last dying day, was humble as humble can be. And Aisha wanted to be buried there in that spot, but out of respect and admiration, she granted his request. And of course, he would ultimately be buried next to, as he called them, my companions, my friends. He wanted to have that kind of brotherhood into the next world. And again, he set up a system which we will talk about in our Uthman presentation, a new way of appointing a Khalifa, a shura in a house with notable companions of trustworthiness and honesty, and a system. So we're seeing now the third different way a caliph was selected, all incorporating the shura, concept. We will talk about some of the Shia, objections to that and some of the lies that have been spread. But, he died as he lived. It's really fitting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala glorified him as he was leading the salah. His religious commitment was second to none. He died doing what he loved and what he lived for. In the morning, Fajr prayer, straightening lines and yelling at people like he always did because he wanted everybody to be so punctual and so like he was, And as his famous line, as he said, the dog, has killed me. That was the last line he says. He was stabbed, in that masjid on that fateful morning. And we're here again, to honor the man. It's what we hope I have done a good job of, inshallah, God willing, over these 3 different hours that we've conducted this. Really, his accomplishments deserve much more than that. But I hope I've done my best, enlightening a lot of you guys on the kind of man he was and the kind of society that we had and the kind of society we can have again. But it all starts right here with trust and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without that taqwa, none of it will be possible.
In fact, Brother Yusuf, the summary, small summary, the summary of the truth of Umar Ibn Khattab story, with all my respect. That's very traction. When we study, actually, when I was in university, college, but in university, different, the whole year, only Umar. Number one. Number two, the story of Umar, by the way, is a lot of things we're supposed to, if we apply it in our life here, we have no problem. And by the way, Umar Ibn Khattab, and twice the Masjid al-Aqsa was occupied. And Umar Ibn Khattab one liberated, and also Salah ad-Din Ayyub. And we're waiting for another Umar Ibn Khattab, also Salah ad-Din Ayyub, until now we don't have. By the way, there is no Palestinian organization, by the way. I'm Palestinian, but no one really worked to liberate the Masjid al-Aqsa. Period. And I'm not involved with all those. Why? And also, I don't believe in them. My point is still, Rasulullah told us about that, what's going on in the Muslim world right now, in Masjid al-Aqsa, as sooner or later, inshallah, with yaqeen, with the righteous people. As I say, there is no Arab Muslim leaders, period. I mean, Arab and non-Arab, working for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always controlled by something else other than their own people, and not working for Allah, period. That, but also, again, the Masjid al-Aqsa, Umar Ibn Khattab, always within your mind, how to help, to speak, to understand the true story of the Masjid al-Aqsa. On daily basis. Daily basis, I feel myself after Fajr. I feel I want to go to Masjid al-Aqsa. My heart's always there. My mind always there in Masjid al-Aqsa. Just because I'm from there, not because I'm American. I'm here since more than 35 years in America. But my heart always there. I'm supposed to be, every Muslim supposed to be the same, male and female. Well, all the sister, I'm sorry with that, but sister and brothers have to be the same. Think right about themselves. Now, any question for Brother Yusuf online also? Sunnahfollowers, any question about Brother Yusuf, please.
What's the gateway to Persia?
A gateway is a saying in English, meaning that he asked the question I talked about earlier, how you open the gates to Persia. It's a saying that when you had a man-made barrier guarding a nation, this is the territorial border, that when you opened it up, it was a metaphor for saying you opened the gates, of the land, that the gates are open, all of that now belongs to you, and you absorb all of that society.
What's coated with poison mean? Coated with poison.
In the old days, and nowadays, of course, poisoning is not a fashionable way in some ways to commit an assassination. We have guns. There's many more sophisticated ways. But in those days, you would create a poison out of a variety of natural, things, ingredients, and you would dip a knife or an arrow, in that. And when you would stab someone inside, it would get into the bloodstream.
Yes.
And it would get the person sick.
And in fact, with all my respect, they mean, the Shia themselves, they say they send someone to kill Umar. Not because what happened, the problem, because they say this. No, the Shia said they send him to kill Umar ibn Khattab. They admitted that and they are proud of that.
And you listen often, to Shia complaints. It's really quite funny. The one thing I always heard they didn't like the most about Umar was the Mutta. You know, when you talk about following your own desire, you find
متعة was متعة. I can marry, but relationship is only. You agree to marry me? Yes, had a relationship. And 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever minutes, and that's it. She's done. That's
15 minutes even.
10 minutes, one day, 5 days.
Yeah, that's
They
متعة.
do it in something.
And they believe Ali did that. That's Umar against it. Imagine that.
Oh, no.
One of the Shia actually want to argue about mut'ah, and he defend mut'ah. I say, brother, you have sisters and brother, you have sisters, yeah. And I ask him a question, okay, can I marry your sister only for 1 hour, please? I say, are you crazy? He said, no, I'm smart, trust me. Imagine, no, he's gonna marry anybody else, but not his sister. Imagine this. That's why, as far as the insult the Sahaba period, they're kuffar. By the way, I was an imam, and I told him in Bokar before, I know some Shia pray with me, but not the way the Shia, they called Shia. They called Shia and Shia, they are from Iraq and even from Iran, but not the Shia, grow up the Shia. Wallahi, they fast with us, they pray with us for our Jum'ah. And they even ask me, mashallah, rich people, about the zakat. They ask that, but they call Shia, but they are not truly Shia that we see in Iraq and not actually Iraq, Iran, Bahrain, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt a lot. In Egypt.
To add something that, because when I lived, I was working with a lot of Shia, and I had the same discussion. I asked the gentleman, I said, would you be happy with your daughter? His daughter was 24 years old at the time. I think it's somewhere around there. I said, would you like your daughter? Because he was telling me that Muta was one of the biggest blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave humanity. And I asked him, would you like your daughter to engage in 5 or 6 Muta marriages over the next decade? Oh, no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Yeah. And then he said to me that it's for the widows, that Muta is the most generous human thing possible, that it was for the widows. So me being the type of person I am, I research everything. I pulled up Google. I went to a Muta marriage site. There was 106 men and 2 women, on that site. So, I mean, if it was for the widows and the widows were really in dire need of help and charity and sadaqah, as this gentleman had claimed, why was it 103 or 105 males versus two females? I mean, it is nothing more than prostitution. And it's basically the core from what my experience is dealing and reading their publications with their despots and hatred that they have for Umar Ibn Al Khattab.
Anything about Umar? Story? Any question? Sunnahfollowers, any question about Umar Ibn Khattab, brother Yusuf? Not me. Sunnahfollowers?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Ramali and Brother Yusuf. This was very, very good lesson that you have given of this. I guess you would call him one of the Sahabas of Umar. So may Allah bless both of you and your family as well. Thank you.
آمين جزاكم الله خير. تفضل إن شاء الله. نسأل الله العظيم رب العظيم أن يجمعنا جميعا في المسجد الأقصى. اللهم يا رب جميعا يا رب انصر المسجد الأقصى يا رب. اللهم انصر المسجد الأقصى يا رب. اللهم انصر المسجد الأقصى يا رب. أهل المسجد الأقصى واحفظهم يا الله يا الله يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم على محمد وآل محمد. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. إن شاء الله إن شاء الله.
I just want to say I love Umar and I want you all to be with us.
All of us will have Umar. Inshallah. To the followers, you can close inshallah. Thank you.